Hi there. In this video, I'm going to show how to work this wide open base in here so that you're able to knit this large loop and create this beautiful flower on top of it. The flower motif that you just saw is a 10 stitch pattern repeat, and we add 5 stitches for the beginning, so it's 10 stitches plus 5. To start with, I'll be slipping the first stitch and knitting to the point of the repeat. You don't need to put markers, but I am putting markers in here to help you see where my repeat starts and where my repeat ends. To start the repeat, you knit 1 stitch, then you transfer that stitch back to the left needle. Then you take the next 4 stitches and pass them over that first stitch. So we passed 1, this is the second, 3 and 4. You'll notice as I am passing the stitches over that stitch, that first stitch I knitted, I am letting my yarn expand enough space to cover these 4 stitches. What we don't want to do is we don't want to keep it tight like this. We want to create a large enough space to allow for these 4 stitches that we just passed over. Then I'm going to move my marker again. You don't really need to use a marker, but I am to show you that I'm going to move my yarn to the front, and I'm going to loop that yarn around that first stitch on my right needle, or wrap that stitch from front to back, and then I've got my yarn back in the back. The reason I do this is because I want to anchor this yarn so I can make my next move, which is to do a 2 yarn overs. If I don't wrap it around the stitch, I'll show you here. So if I don't wrap it, I make my 2 yarn overs, then there's a big huge hole in here that I need to fix one way or the other. Now you can fix it on the next row, but it is much simpler to take care of it on this row by just bringing that yarn to the front, wrapping that stitch from front to back, just simply like this, having that yarn available in the back to make the double yarn overs, wrapping the yarn twice. Then I'm actually going to get rid of this marker. Next thing I need to do is knit then the end of the repeat. But if I knit this stitch again, if I just knit it like this and then knit the next stitch, I'm going to have a huge space in here between this stitch that I used to bind off or get rid of these other 4 stitches. I fix that by knitting these 2 stitches together, and I will make up for that decrease in the next row, or whenever I fill in the space in here where I made the double yarn overs. So then I knit 2 together and knit my stitches to the end of the repeat. So here we are. This is the first row of creating that big space as a base for the flower. I'm going to work it again, but continental style. So here I knit my first stitch, put that stitch back on the left needle tip, pass 4 stitches over, 2, 3 and 4. So here we go. And here you need to kind of be intentional when you space these stitches, because your yarn is gonna tend to go to the left, but you won't space, so just make sure you have space. I'm going to remove the stitch marker. Then I'm going to wrap this stitch as I did when I worked my first repeat. So I'll just keep my yarn to the front, transfer that stitch to the left needle tip, bring that yarn around it, put it back on the right needle tip, make my 2 yarn overs, knit the next 2 stitches together, and work to the end of my repeat. So this is my first row of how to make this big opening space or base to work my flower. On the next row, I am going to work to that double yarn over, and I'm going to make double yarn overs again, but I'll just mimic what I've got on my needle. So I'll remove one wrap and then remove the next wrap, and then make sure to bring my yarn to the front, so I am knitting to the next yarn over. I'll switch and show this traditional style, knitting to that point. So here I make my yarn over, wrap the yarn around. I transfer my yarn over, transfer my next loop of my yarn over, wrap the yarn around, and knit to the end of my, in this case I'm purling, but working the rest of my row. So here we are, we worked the first 2 rows of the base of that flower. Next, I am going to make the flower itself. So I follow my pattern to the spot where I'm going to make my large loop, and the large loop is going to be made in this double yarn over. For the purpose, eventually these 2 yarn overs are going to be let loose like this, but when I'm working my loop, I like to keep them looped around the needle, because that provides me some tension as I'm working my loop, my large loop. So you can either unravel them or release these extra wraps, or you can leave them on your needle until you're finished with working that large loop. So I'm to this point here, I take my contrasting color. I like to tie that contrast color around that main color to anchor, and you won't see this knot, and it helps to anchor my yarn. But if you have seen my other making loops in a different color video, you realize that I'm going to make my loop, but I also am going to trap that main color yarn within that loop. And to do this, I move my main color yarn over the needle, and so as I begin my making that loop, that yarn is trapped within. So here I'm making the first knit one, yarn over, and I continue the process of knit one yarn over until I have 25 on my right needle. I am finishing my loop 25, and here I have 25 loops on my right needle tip. At this point, I'm going to release all the extra wrap, and here I want to make sure I tug a little bit on my main color, because I want to make sure I don't have too many, it's not very loose within that loop. So I just give it just a bit of a tug to make sure it's nice and tight. Then I'm going to continue working until I get to the next base of my next flower. However, since I'm working with the 2 yarns, I'm going to trap this flower color yarn behind and underneath my main color yarn in between the flowers. So to do that, you can actually tuck it in, trap it in whichever way you feel comfortable with. I like to trap it in underneath, and I trap it every other stitch. To begin with, I'm going to trap it on the first stitch. So I insert the needle as if to knit, loop my flower color yarn as if I'm using it to knit, but I'm not. And then I wrap my main color yarn similarly, then take this yarn underneath and then bring through my main color yarn through that stitch, and then I knit one stitch normally. Then next time I repeat the process for the next stitch, knit my next yarn stitch normally, and I'm trapping on that that fifth stitch. So here I've got, if you look in the back, I've trapped my yarn every other stitch and carried it across so I can work my next loop. I finished making my 2 loops in this sample, and I'm going to work my next row, which is to divide this large loop into 5 equal parts and mimic that little flower. So I turn my work, and for this I'm going to work only with my flower color. So I'm going to slip the first 5 stitches. Next I am going to make a yarn over. Now this is very interesting. You can, if you want, to wrap this yarn around like this and make a yarn over, which will be easy, and really in the bigger scheme of things you won't see this. So that's one way to do it. Or simply just make a yarn over like this and bring the yarn back to the front. Next I'm going to purl 5 stitches off of this loop. So I'm going to take the first 5 loops, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, separate them and grab those 5. Kind of pull on them to even them out, and then purl all 5 together. Then make a yarn over and then purl the next 5 together. Now one thing I do for the second purl 5 and the fourth purl 5, I like to rearrange the first 2 loops. I found from experience that the divided loop looks better if I rearrange these first 2 loops. So I simply just move the first to the second position and the second to the first position, and it looks better in the front. So then I purl those together, make a yarn over, bring back the yarn to the front, and continue the process of purling 5 loops together. Yarn over. Here it's my fourth, so I'm going to rearrange those loops. You don't have to do it, it's a personal preference. And yarn over, and here I made actually 23 instead of 25, so I'm not going to worry about it. And I'm going to knit the last 3 loops. For you it should be 5, and then I'm going to make a yarn over and then continue purling to the next loop, and I'll show this one worked Continental style. Here make a yarn over and then purl 5 loops together, yarn over, switch the order of the first 2 loops for the next one, and purl 5 together, yarn over, yarn over, and this is my fourth, so I'm going to switch the order. By the way, switch the order but don't twist them, so simply just switch the position of the stitch, so the first is the second and the second is the first. Here I am done. I make a yarn over, and because those are the edge stitches, I'm simply going to transfer them to my left needle tip.